The coolest looking case I saw at Computex this past summer was the Hyte X50. So when Hyte hit me up and said, hey, you want to take a look, give us some feedback, maybe do a build in the case, I said sure, but then my follow-up was, what am I going to build and what color am I going to choose? It's available in Snow White, Pitch Black, Wild Cherry, Strawberry Milk, Taro Milk, and Matcha Milk. Some very distinct colorways for this case, and they have matching sets of fans that go along with each of those colors. So I did what I've done many times before, and I said to my wife, can I build you a new computer? She agreed, and the color she chose was Strawberry Milk.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by the Paul's Hardware store on paulshardware.net, the only official source for Paul's Hardware merchandise. Tantalizing t-shirts, brilliant beer sets, high-quality hoodies, and more, all featuring the classic thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers, or the 8-bit thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers who hate curves. New designs are added sporadically and at random, so head over to paulshardware.net and get some of that sweet, sweet merch right now. Or not right now, after you watch the video. Either way. So we got a three-part plan for today. First, we're going to take a closer look at the X50 and go over some of the features. Then we're going to do a case swap / upgrade, moving my wife's existing all-white system from the Lian 011 Dynamic Evo over here into the X50. And I will also be upgrading her graphics card from the existing 3070 Ti that's in there to this GeForce RTX 5070 Ti from Gigabyte, their Eagle all-white edition. And then we have some light testing. I'm running a few quick benchmarks on her existing system over here that we will rerun once we swapped everything into the X50. And just to list off a few stats, if you're not familiar with the X50, part of the reason it stands out is its bubbly overall design. It's got lots of curves going on, including the curved mesh front panel where the actual perforations wrap around the front, as we discussed in our Computex coverage. And then they've made a curved laminated tempered glass panel that's available on the X50. They call it laminated acoustic glass because the lamination apparently also reduces the amount of vibrations and noise coming through. And if you're wondering what the price is, here in the US it's $160 for the X50 with the tempered glass side panel. And then they also have an X50 Air that's going to be $130 that's got a perforated side panel instead of the tempered glass. It looks like they'll also be doing some custom Hyte badges for the first 50,000 units sold. And as of the posting of this video, these are going up for pre-sale and they're expecting to start shipping them in early November. One last thing I want to mention before I get this out of the box is I am not doing a review, strictly speaking, today. So I'm going to be looking up several other reviews so you guys can get alternative opinions besides mine. And I'll post those in the video description down below, which you should definitely be checking out if you're at all considering pre-ordering something, because pre-ordering is not something I always recommend doing. First part of exploring any new case is taking it apart, of course, and I sure hope I do this right. Tempered glass always makes you nervous when you're trying to figure out how things work for the first time. So you lift from the bottom, and that lifts up and slides off like that. And there you can see the curved tempered glass. And you guys aren't going to be able to tell this, but the demonstration they did at Computex was you talk to someone and then you go like that and then you drop it down again. And it actually does a pretty decent job of blocking the noise because of the lamination on the tempered glass, acoustic glass they call it, but that goes along with the rounded curved aesthetic of the case overall. Front panel, I'm guessing, just, pops off as a normal front panel would. And here again is something that is deceptively simple in its look, but having this mesh panel wrap around the sides, have the mesh continuing all the way up to the front, not only maintains the look of the case across the front, but was also pretty difficult to manufacture. So Hyte went through several different prototypes getting this front panel worked out properly. And because of the curve and these bent panels along the side, it's fairly rigid as well. The opposite side panel lifts up and off in the same way, and again you can see that continued curved design with the mesh. And then here at the back we have a pretty generous cable management area with a good couple inches of space, as well as the continued use of curves pretty much wherever they could fit them in. Got some rubber grommeted pass-throughs here for the cables with the color that matches up with the rest of the case. Included accessories are some case screws, some zip ties, we have some white Velcro straps. I feel like the zip ties should have been white for this version of the case as well, but it's okay. I'll give them a pass for that one. And because wherever these panels mount on, they're held in by little plastic clips, you have a replacement for one of those as well, in case one breaks. Taking a closer look at the internals of the case, starting here on the side panel where you're gonna have your cable management and everything, you do have a drive cage that's held on with a single thumb screw. It looks like you could fit a 3.5 inch drive inside, but actually you've got this metal housing that allows you to mount two 2.5 inch drives if you so desire, but it can also function as a 3.5 inch drive mount via those mounting holes on the side. You just have your 3.5 inch drive kind of sticking out there, but there is enough room. Again, with the colorways matching, we have all white cables in here. You're gonna have black cables with the darker theme cases. But that gives you your USB 2.0, your USB 3.0, your USB 3.2 Gen 2 right there, which has a cap on it. Actually, I said USB 2.0, but one of these is HD audio, and then the other one is your front panel connectors, which, yes, does come in a block instead of individual little pins, so that's appreciated. And you can also see, along with the Velcro strips that are included in the accessories, you have 4 of them pre-installed here along the side, with the Hyte H looking at you as well. And then there's another Velcro strap up here at the top, since we have a top-mounted power supply spot location, ATX mounting area. You can see there's a cutout down there at the bottom, so that's going to allow your power supply to pull air up and exhaust it out of the case. And up here we can also get a closer look at these little grommeted pass-throughs, which are pretty sturdy, they're thick grommets. Another set of them along the side here. You have a side mount here for up to a 360mm all-in-one radiator. You can actually do up to 70mm thick for the radiator there as well. 3x120 as well as what you have for fan mounting here. Up here on the top you have a power button, you've got a mic headphone jack, and you've got a couple USB 3.0 ports as well as that USB 3.2 Gen 2. For your front intake, which is going to be right up against that big mesh panel, you can do 3 140mm fans. If you're going to do an AIO, you can do 3x120 or a 360mm radiator. You can also do thicker radiators up here, up to 105mm thick per the specs. And rounding things out for fan support, you have up to 3 120mm fans that can be placed for intake here at the bottom. They're not recommending this spot for use with the radiator, but it can fit up to 32mm thick fans. And then here in the back you have another single 120mm fan mount, and while I'm at it, you can see the sort of unique implementation that they have here for your exhaust. This is another cool thing that they showed off at Computex, which is that rather than punching holes in the rear to allow the air to pass through, they actually just took each metal piece, cut it, and then bent it so it's sort of horizontal. And hopefully you can see that there. So they're not losing any material, they're not just throwing away any of these stuffs that they're punching out. You still have a nice open segment here for airflow, and it's also remains quite sturdy. So I thought that was really cool, both for the functionality of it and then also maintaining the design. They've gone with the same technique for your rear panels here for your PCI Express expansion. So that maintains that look for the back of the case. And the back of the case is often a place where you don't see quite as much attention to detail and aesthetics. They've also included some tie-down points back here because with the top-mounted power supply, you're going to have at least one AC power cable coming out of there. They put those there so you can route it down and tie it down to the side. So again, you can have a perfectly clean, beautiful, nice-looking system once everything is put together. I should also mention for motherboard support, we have a nice and smooth cutout here for accessing the back of your CPU cooler if you need to do that. And then you have pre-installed motherboard standoffs for ATX builds. You also have labels here for ATX, Micro ATX, and Mini ITX, depending on what you're installing. Case seems a little large for just a Mini ITX motherboard to be installed. But then again, per the specs, you have eATX motherboard support as well. So you can have your motherboard stick out a little bit more on this side, which is what eATX does. They're fatter. Finishing off some specs, for the power supply chamber up here, you can have PSUs up to 233mm in length. For graphics card, you can have GPUs up to 430mm in length. And if you're going with an air cooler for your CPU, you have up to 170mm of height that you can fit there. So those are the specs you want to keep in mind if you're choosing additional components to install in this case. And here's a look at the bottom, the underside of the case, so you can see we also have rounded feet, just finishing off that theme. And there's a mesh dust filter here for your bottom intake fans, which is held on by magnets, as I've just discovered. Pops on, just like that. All right, we've got the motherboard installed with the AIO. I left those mounted so we're not going to taint our CPU temperature performance results at all. Now we're going to drop in some fans. So these actually come in 4 packs. We have 8 of them total. If I had one more of these fans, no, 2 more. If I had 2 more, I would swap out the fans on the AIO as well, because I think that would actually look kind of cool, having all the pink fans on the white hardware. And as someone who has perhaps installed too many RGB LED fans in the course of my life so far, having these fans be colorful with their nice pink matching finish, but also only requiring a single standard 4-pin PWM fan connector to plug in really simplifies the installation, given that fan installation has gotten a lot more complicated with the advent of RGB and its continued popularity for however long it's been popular. Anyway, these fans are FA12s if you want to know the actual model number. Hyte calls it a modern aesthetic fan. So we're going to install 3 of them at the bottom for intake, 3 more at the front for intake. A lot of that front air is going to be fed right into the CPU radiator, which we're okay with, and then the bottom here is going to be feeding air to the GPU and remaining components. And then we'll do one at the back as well. Random little attention to detail I found here on the bottom while installing case fans. The foot actually blocks one of the mounting points for the front case fan. So see those 3 holes? One pokes all the way through, so as long as you have a screwdriver that will fit in there. Of course you could remove the foot. It also has a couple screws holding it in, but you know, this means you don't have to do that. Not my cleanest cable management job ever, but given that I was working with a lot of existing stuff and we have cable extensions, which always adds a lot, it's all gonna fit in there, theoretically, with the side panel. Oops. Ta-da! Oop. Okay, there we go. See? It's perfect. All right, let's see if I did this right. Power. Oh, it works. Obviously, a bit more setup required. Gonna need to configure some things, but for the time being, we have transferred the build into the Hyte X50, which means we can do this. Okay guys, with that, the build is all put together, and I feel like as I was introducing this, I skipped over some of the components that we were swapping from the 011 Dynamic Evo that my wife had used before and into this build. The CPU is an Intel 12700K, and then we got several ASUS components, including a 1000 watt ROG Thor power supply, as well as the ASUS ROG Z690 formula motherboard, a very clean looking all white motherboard, as well as the Strix LC360 all-in-one liquid cooler, and I've carried over at least 3 of the Corsair QL series RGB fans. Now, case performance is generally focused on cooling and how cool the case plus the fans installed can keep the components inside. So I did do some very quick A/B performance testing going from the old system to the new system, but please do not take this as an official review. There are lots of other variables, such as the added fans I have in this system, and the fact that we're not going with a clean install or anything like that. This still has my wife's operating system in it, and it's a system that's been up and running for like a good 3+ years. With that in mind, when running 3D Mark TimeSpy Extreme, we had a maximum temperature of 73 degrees with the 011 Dynamic Evo and 70 degrees with the X50, so it did bring it down a few degrees, which is nice. Meanwhile, the GPU maximum temperature also came down about 3 degrees from 69.1 C to 66.4. I also ran a 15-minute IDIS64 stress test. With that, the CPU maximum temperature on the 011 Dynamic Evo was 89 degrees, and again 3 degrees cooler with the X50 down to 86. Meanwhile, the GPU's maximum temperature was 61.7 with the 011 Dynamic Evo and about 1 degree warmer with the X50 at 62.5. And if you're wondering why the GPU temperature is lower during the stress test, it's because the CPU is being stressed at the same time, so it has a harder time feeding the GPU and keeping it at max load. Oh, and I should mention that for these tests, I did swap back to the 3070 Ti Vision that we started with, just to maintain a little bit more consistency from A to B. Now, as I mentioned, I think in the intro, whenever I agree to do a video on a case, or to do a build or anything like that, I always have the thought of what's going to happen to it afterwards, which is why I decided, rather than doing a fresh new build in this system, I would swap my wife's system into the new case, since this is the case that she wanted, because I don't like doing all this work, a nice pretty build, and then tearing it down right afterwards. That said, because of that decision, I ran into multiple problems with this build that I'm going to recap for you briefly. And I should mention that these problems don't really have much to do with the case itself. This is just me venting a little bit of my frustration over the past day or two. Here's the biggest one. Do you hear this? I want to wait for it to stop and start again. Stopped. And there it goes again. That is a pump rattle, and that is a often common symptom of all-in-one liquid coolers after they've been in use for 2-3 years, sometimes even less than that. Unfortunately, I realized that that was happening at a pretty bad time. I had already gone far enough along with the build and this process and the A/B testing that I was like, I can't just swap that out right now due to the difficulty of doing so after all the cable management is done, as well as the fact that it would further spoil my A/B testing. But for anyone who does have an all-in-one liquid cooler, a rattle or a noise like that coming from the pump, especially if it can't be gotten rid of by increasing or decreasing the RPM, and especially something that comes and goes like that, is, I would say, a warning sign for imminent pump failure, and I am not going to be leaving this all-in-one liquid cooler in this system. I did for the purposes of finishing off this video and showing you this nice, pretty aesthetic finished build, because it is a very aesthetic case, and I think if you're considering this case, that the look of your system is probably fairly high on your priority list. But for me, it was just a big headache, and it was also frustrating that it keeps making that noise, and I keep hearing that noise, and it keeps digging its way into my brain and telling me like, you need to do something about this. But it was exacerbated by a secondary problem, which is RGB. And again, with an aesthetic build, I wanted to have a finished system that I could show you guys and at least have some RGB configuration that is like, oh, that looks pretty. That's part of the point, right? Well, RGB control in a DIY system like this can become more or less complex depending on the number of components you have in there that have to be controlled by different sets of software. And I unfortunately have way too many components in here that need to be controlled by different kinds of RGB software, including ASUS Armory Crate, the Gigabyte Control Center, and of course Corsair iCUE, which are possibly 3 of the most notorious RGB control software suites that just have too much going on, too much bloat. And while they can be often configured in aesthetically pleasing ways, like before I had used the Corsair iCUE software to do like a white background on all the fans with an RGB element that kind of swirled around between them, it actually looked pretty cool, and it worked for a while until it stopped. I eventually decided to completely uninstall Corsair iCUE, even going through their procedures for removing it completely from the system. I attempted using OpenRGB, which is a third-party software which controlled most of the stuff, but not everything. And then I went to Signal RGB, which is also a third-party software, which is, I'd say, a bit more advanced than OpenRGB, although it does have some ad integration and upselling going on, depending if you want to get the Pro version. But that was able to control everything, although with the RGBs on the all-in-one liquid cooler, I couldn't get them to be just white with that software for some reason. It always went into some RGB variant, even if I was trying to go for white. And while Signal RGB does have support for a fair amount of RTX 50 series graphics cards, it does not have support for the Gigabyte RTX 5070 Ti Eagle, which meant I had to install the Gigabyte Control Center software, which immediately threw a conflict with the Signal RGB software, and I was just like, cancel, whatever, just get it like this. And I got it like this, and I'm not doing anything fancier than this because I'm going to be removing the all-in-one liquid cooler in the future anyway. And then the final just irritating, frustrating thing as far as the aesthetics and getting that set up with this was that I had stuck LEDs, at least on the lowest of the 3 fans. And I kept trying to figure out, is this a problem with the fan itself? Is this a problem with the little Corsair RGB hub controller? And these are the previous generations, by the way, the ones that came before the iCUE Link. I grabbed one of the other fans from the old case, plugged it in. It seemed to work just fine with no stuck LEDs, so I swapped that out. I had to partially remove the all-in-one liquid cooler to do that. And then when I plugged in everything again, it still has a stuck LED. I guess at least it's pink and matches the rest of the case. So as you look at my final nice looking, hopefully B-roll shots of this build, you might notice that stuck LED. But other than that, despite the headaches, I do like the finished look with the bit of RGB lighting. And the really funny thing is Hyte has Nexus RGB software that is another type of software that can go in and do stuff like this. And I didn't even use that software because I actually don't have any Hyte RGB components. But that brings me back around to a little bit more feedback directly on the case itself, which is supposed to be the focal point of this video. And clearly, the aesthetics are one of the peak features of this case. If you like the look of it, and I know that's subjective, it is a beautiful case once you get the system all in there, especially if you've done your cable management up relatively cleanly as I have. And really the sort of bubbly, rounded corners just about everywhere they could fit them in are what distinguishes this case and sets it apart from other cases aesthetically. Also, having gone through a bunch of RGB frustration with this build, I really like the fact that you could have the color-matched fans, have everything with a very distinct, colorful aesthetic look, but you could actually have no RGB. These fans are so nice that you just plug in a single PWM connector and you're done. You don't have to fiddle with it at all after that. Also on the positive side for this case would be the performance. The FA12 fans stay nice and quiet while moving lots of air. I got slightly better cooling performance than the 011 Dynamic Evo with those caveats that I mentioned, which is a pretty comparably priced case. It goes for around $160. I've just had to appreciate the quietness of this case while that pump rattle isn't happening, which every so often, oh, no, there it is again. And then third on my list of major positives for this case would be the attention to detail, not just with the design and making all these curves uniform and about the same amount of curvature everywhere, but little things like the fact that there is a pass-through on the feet at the bottom so you can still mount your fans through there without having to remove the foot. The case is also very open and very accessible and very easy to build in, and even just some things like the fact that on the FA12 fans, these struts that support the fan hub at the center, when you have multiples of them lined up next to each other, the curve there actually matches and sort of swooshes through onto the next fan. Just those little aesthetic touches I feel like really bring everything together, and if there's anyone from Hyte's design team watching, I just wanted to point out, I noticed, and good job you guys. Moving over to my critiques of the case, which actually do go back a little bit to the fans are not included. So for a case that you're spending $160-ish on in the US, you need to consider the addition of the fans as well, which increases the overall price of the case. It is tempered somewhat by the fact that they don't send you fans that you eventually just remove and then replace with fans yourself. It gives you the choice to use Hyte's color-matched fans or to go with any other fans on the market. And then I'll also point out that for anyone who is trying to keep the costs down but loves the look of this case, the mesh version does come in at a good $30 to $40 cheaper, and that would have presumably better airflow as well, although I didn't have that case here to test. The final thing that I would have liked to have seen included on a current generation case that is a little bit towards the higher end would be a GPU sag support. I've got a little bit of sag going on with the 5070 Ti. Hopefully it's not too noticeable right now, but we might be personalizing this build a little bit more in the future. My wife loves playing Overwatch, so maybe we could add a little Diva mech in there or something to help hold it up. But guys, that is going to wrap it up for this video on the new Hyte X50 case, seen here in the strawberry milk color. If you guys have any feedback on this video or the build or the way I tested things, if you want to leave those in the comment section down below, that's always greatly appreciated. And also, if you can hit the thumbs up button on this video, that helps me out a lot. And there's a link to my store down in the video description at paulshardware.net where you can get yourself some merchandise like shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and more. Thank you guys once again for watching this video. Thank you very much to Hyte for sending this case over for me to take a look at. We'll see you all in the next one.